Welcome to JustWannaQuilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Townsend Guard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just wanna quilt. Today we talked to Amy Bradley of Purple Pineapple Studios. She's super interesting. Her mom owns a shop, and she strategized on how to create patterns for the beginner that would encourage them to buy fabric. She is one of the designers that are using postcards to create patterns. We talked to her about her business and her strategy. It's really interesting. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Amy Bradley. I'm with Purple Pineapple Studio, and I'm located in Wisconsin.
That's very cool. And the way I got to you, Amy, was I saw did you do a schoolhouse? You did a schoolhouse, didn't you, at Quilt Market? Am I right?
Yep, I did a schoolhouse and I had a booth.
And you had a booth. And were you at the sample spree too? Did you do sample spree? Okay, so we will talk about all of that and explain that. That is a lot going on. And each one is like more energetic than the other. It's kind of remarkable. So most of these interviews are, at least the professional interviews, are based on at Quilt Market and contacts connected there. So tell me, have you been to Quilt Market before?
Yes, I had a booth at Spring Market in St. Louis, and that was the first quilt market that I vended at. But I'd been to a couple before that in probably 2010, 2011, because my mom owns a quilt shop. So I went with her as a buyer helper.
Oh, really cool. Okay, well, we'll get back to all of this. I told you that the first question was going to be the first question. It's never the first question because I get too excited and forget. Okay, so the first question is, what is your first memory of sewing?
Of sewing was when I was a kid, we couldn't really afford all the cool clothes for the Barbie dolls and the Cabbage Patch Kids and stuff. So I made all of my Barbie's clothes and clothes for my Patch Kids. So that was the first time that I really started sewing, and my mom taught me how to sew.
That's really interesting. And then what about quilting? When did you start sewing, and was quilting the first thing you did, or when did you start? I'm not saying it very well. When did you start quilting, and was your mom quilting? I know. I told you it's not hard-hitting journalism. It's really not.
My mom wasn't a quilter when I first started quilting. The first quilt I made was when I was a senior in high school, because I was going to go off to college, and I decided I wanted to have a cool quilt for my bed, and I didn't know any quilters. I'd never seen any quilts, handmade quilts really, but I did frequent the big box fabric store a lot because I made a lot of my own clothes back in high school and junior high, and saw some books there. So I bought a book on quilting, and I made my first quilt, and it was a painful, horrible process because I came from garment making, so I didn't know what rotary cutters were or rulers or that they existed. Mm-hmm. So I traced and drew every triangle and square onto paper and cut them out, and then pinned that to the fabric and cut that out with scissors because that's all I knew with fabric, with garment making.
That's really interesting, and really goes back to sort of the heart of quilting in some way, doesn't it?
Yep. And so once I made that quilt, I decided I never ever wanted to make another quilt again. But 5 or 6 years later, my mom had discovered quilting, and she drags me into every one of her hobbies, coerces me, and I've done like cold process soap making and doll making and polymer clay and fabric dyeing, like punch needle embroidery, all because my mom, forces me to do her hobbies with her.
That's really great.
And
I love that.
Quilting, and she had discovered quilting a couple years after I made my first quilt, and became friends with her local quilt shop. And she decided that she wanted to have me do quilting too. So for Christmas one year, she bought me a couple $100 worth of quilting supplies, the rulers and mats and rotary cutters and a bunch of fat quarters. And so I decided, since she spent so much on these quilting supplies for Christmas, I should probably use them. And that's one of the only crafts that she coerced me into that's really stuck with me.
That's really interesting. Why do you think it did?
I'm not really sure. I like the process.
Mm-hmm.
I like that there's something tangible and actually useful in the end. And I really like the math of the quilting and
you like
that
the
sort
math?
of thing.
Is that what you just said? The math?
Yeah, the math. Yeah.
Really? You like the math? Okay.
I do.
Okay. Why the math?
I
The math is, it's funny because I do copyright math. That's what it's called. It's really a weird thing to do. I like math and copyright, but I don't really like it in quilting because I mess it up all the time. So why the math?
I don't know. I just really like figuring things out, and I like just trying to figure out the best way to do things, and it's fun for me to try to do the math in a bunch of different ways to figure out the most efficient way to use that piece of fabric. It's
really cool. And your I have one of your patterns because you passed it out at the schoolhouse thing, and that's sort of what the math is really what the pattern is. Like, you're trying to translate the pattern into the math and make it. So what's interesting about the postcards that you do is that you have to be, first, they're really beautiful. I really like your designs. There's like 7 of them that I like. I want to make those. But then, right, I spend my day like, okay, that's the next one. But you have to get the math right, and you have to put it on the back. You have to have the math and the instructions on, what is it, 5x7? Is that what it is? 5x8?
Yep.
Yeah, so 5x7. So it's like, can you get and make it clear so that someone can actually do it? So it's pretty remarkable. Like, that's a lot to get onto one postcard. The back, just the back. That's all you get is the back. Because the front is the picture.
Yeah, I like the challenge of, first of all, trying to come up with something that I can condense down into the limited amount of instructions that I have there, but still come up with a beautiful quilt that's kind of a little more modern or contemporary.
Yeah.
That has, it's kind of simple construction. I usually have 1 or 2 blocks that are repeating to make a quilt, or to a couple blocks that are in a little bit of a different layout. But yeah, it's pretty challenging to come up with the instructions and write it concisely enough that it's understandable and that it fits in such a small space.
Yeah, part of what we're doing with this project, I have a lot of things we're doing. This project's out of control, but one of the things that I'm doing, because I'm trying to quilt every night, it's really out of control, is experience different patterns. So, and I'm not really good at reading patterns, and I get really distracted, so I don't follow them. Like, I just, somehow things go wrong. But I think, like, it's interesting to sort of see, like, I'm looking at the I-beams right now, and, like, I wouldn't have thought that was the construction for that thing. So that was, I think, like, I can do that, and that's kind of what's so cool. I'd like to see more of your work, because I think it seems like you're pitching it at somebody who either is beginning or intermediate, like me. I would say I'm intermediate. Or someone who wants to do something cool and modern but do it quickly. That you're doing the math for them. That it may be that you go, oh, okay, I can figure that out myself. Like, I don't need a pattern, right? Like, okay, I can see what that is. But you've done the for, like, $300, like $3 isn't not $300 a pattern. It's totally not $300 a pattern. It's really been a long day. It's $3.50 a pattern or something. It's not. These are very expensive postcards. But that you've done the math, and that's, like, kind of like, that's really cool. And you're like, okay, well, I don't have to figure out the math. So when you say you like the math, that makes sense to me.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. So how did you decide to make these postcards, and how did you get into designing quilts?
Well, I started designing, came up kind of with the business and thought maybe I should, try to make a go of this, partly because I'm bad at following patterns, which seems, weird for a pattern designer, but, I always, whenever I was reading a pattern, I'd think, oh, this is not very efficient use, or it would be so much easier to do it this way, or what if I just changed this thing? And I never ever followed the instructions completely. I was always rewriting the patterns, and I figured, if I'm rewriting every pattern I'm buying, why do I keep buying patterns? I might as well just write my own. So that's kind of why I started doing that.
It's really interesting. And how long have you been doing this?
It's been 2.5 years now.
Interesting.
And the spring market in May of 2017, that was my first market. But I've designed my first patterns about 2.5 years ago, and my mom owns a quilt shop about 2.5 hours from me. So she was the first shop that sold all my patterns for about 6 or 7 months. And then I went kind of national in I think May of last year was when I sent patterns out to quilt shops and say, hey, please carry my things.
So what was that like? How did you figure out who to send to, and how did you, if there's someone out there that's like you, that's sort of like, that sounds fun to do. Like, how did you, that makes sense, your mom, in your mom's shop, that makes sense. But How did you do that next step? How did you figure out who to send it to? Like which ones did you choose? How did you, it seems completely overwhelming.
That was a really hard process, because basically what I did was I went on Facebook and I looked up, all the quilt shops that I could find, and looked for ones that were a little more modern or looked like my patterns would fit better in. And I wrote down names and addresses of who to contact and where to send things to. And I made a giant spreadsheet, because I like spreadsheets too. But I made a giant spreadsheet of about 600 different stores that I wanted to carry my patterns. And I physically mailed them a copy of a pattern and a welcome letter, and crossed my fingers and hoped that it would work out. And for the ones that I couldn't find addresses of, I went to their websites to see if my patterns would fit with them, and then I emailed introductions to them and pictures of my quilts and things like that. And that took months to make the list of everyone that I wanted to send things to. So it was not a very efficient process, but it did get my foot in the door from those mailings and those emails. I got probably about 40 customers.
You did?
Those first couple.
That's really cool. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you continuing to do that to get more business? Does that continue? Are you still using that method to do it, or if you switch to something else?
No, now I'm relying more on Quilt Market and posting on Instagram and things like that. That was just to get my foot in the door.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of work to go to every page's website or Facebook to kind of research them and find their addresses, find the names of the buyers. It was a lot of work.
That is a lot of work.
So so that's not something I'm continuing to do, but that's why I've been going to Quilt Market for the last 2 markets, and I'm going to continue to go.
That's very cool. So you'll be in Chicago?
What was that?
Are you going to Chicago? Do you think you're going to Chicago? Oh, you're going to the markets, not the festivals. Is that right? Just markets?
Yep.
Market.
Yep.
Which is the
Just market.
Just market. Now, would you go to something like other quilt shows, like QuiltCon or Paducah or any of those things, or just focused on the shops so you don't need to go to those?
Right now, I'm focused on the shops. I did go to a QuiltCon in Savannah, and that was a lot of fun. But I was by myself there, and it was a 16-hour drive. So I did that over 2 days.